going on, people? This is where you want to be. Welcome to Spiritual Needs TV. Welcome back to another episode of The Spiritual Journey, episode number 4. And in this episode, we have a fantastic guy for you, coming all the way from America. His name is Brian Hogan. He is an entrepreneur, he's a healer, he's a coach, he has his own business, coaching people how to follow their own intuition and wisdom to create a life that they want for themselves. He's overcome drug addictions and he's just an all-round stand-up guy. The information in this video is going to be amazing, so watch it all the way to the end, guys. And like I always say, thank you for the love and support. I love you all. Namaste.
For me, awakening is such an interesting word because it brings with it this sense of there being some kind of ideology attached to the awakening. And the more awakened I become, for lack of a better way of putting it, the more I detach from language. And so the more it's like there is no ideology, there's no right or wrong way to become awakened. And I find myself on a process of awakening. Like each day I learn more about who I am and what stops me, what propels me. And I sort of, the more I go further down this journey of awakening, the more I go into a sense of uncertainty about the world and uncertainty about everything. But actually the uncertainty feels like peace because it's like no longer trying to figure out the meaning of life.
Was you always aware then of this sort of process that you were going through, or was there a point in your life where you thought, right, what's going on here? Or
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. There was definitely a point in my life. I think I've always sort of had this curiosity and this fascination about like how the mind works and what's the nature of reality and why are we here? Like I have a philosopher's soul, you know what I mean? Like I've always sort of wanted to grapple with the big questions. Sorry, go ahead.
You've always thought outside the box, those questions that aren't really talked about or answered. Sort of thing. Yeah, I get you.
Definitely. I mean, my mom had a big part to play in that. She was a nun for a while before finally leaving the convent behind and having us. So I was raised in this sort of like semi-Catholic worldview, but my mom also studied Buddhism and all these other things. And so from the jump, I had all these different fragments of different ideologies coming into my experience. There can't just be one certain way. And I actually ended up having 6 years of being like really thoroughly, deeply a born again Christian. And it was a great experience for me because it gave me this community of love and acceptance, but I'm a gay man. And so that love and acceptance only went so far in that community. You know what I mean? Not because those people are bad or wrong, but because their ideology stops them from loving me in a full way because of their ideology. So that was another example for me of like, wow, there's so much beauty and love and truth here, but the language, the rules, the dogma is getting in the way of really experiencing the deep truth of our total connectedness. So what happened for me is I moved to LA. I wanted to be a filmmaker. I still pursue filmmaking. I'm shooting a film in January, but
amazing.
Say that again?
So that's amazing.
Oh yeah, it's really exciting actually. I love that stuff. But in LA, I sort of took a wild turn into the world of medical marijuana, and I owned a medical marijuana dispensary with a friend for 7 years. And during that time, I was sort of confronted with all of the lies of society, which we're living through a huge time of even more people coming online to how many lies there are in society. And so that was happening for me around 2012 and the reason it was happening was because I was seeing clearly in my day-to-day work how healing cannabis could be. And I had cancer patients every day thanking us for the work we did. And at the same time, I would see on the news all this propaganda about how terrible pot is and how it's wrecking the economy and ruining our communities and all this other stuff. And so I was like, I'm seeing one set of beliefs here and I'm seeing this other experience of truth here that I go through. And so I started to see how much of a setup some of society was, in particular, like the federal government says pot's illegal and you can't do it, but the state of California says it's great and it's medical and you can do it. So we would have the support of the state and we would still be under fear that the feds would come in and raid us. So it's like there were these blatant hypocrisies all throughout that work.
How did that feel for you when you sort of realized that the world isn't as black and white as people are making it out to be, and there are certain organizations that say one thing and then do the other.
It was actually really scary at first. I mean, as a filmmaker and a storyteller, part of me was like, ooh, I'm living through a spy thriller, you know, so, but at the same, yeah, right. But at the same time, it was like, whoa, can I really trust nothing? Can I trust nobody? And so there was this scary part at the beginning. And it's interesting because I've found with other people I've spoken to that a spiritual awakening, there's sort of two kinds of awakening for me. There's like your spiritual awakening, which is what I was describing, I've been going through all my life. And then there's your secular awakening, where you wake up to the fact that society itself is a sham and a setup. Yes. And so I was sort of having these two awakenings happening concurrently. Yes. And this one about society was leading to total fear. Mm-hmm. But this one about even going into spiritual uncertainty and realizing none of the dogmas are true, but the experiences behind the dogmas are true, made it so that suddenly there became this comfort in having the uncertainty. And it was like realizing that there's nothing external that I can really trust, that the government's not out to save me, that the healthcare profession is not out to heal me, you know what I mean? That the food industry is not out to nourish me, and so on. It made it so going inward to find what is true for me internally, to find what resonates with me, what makes me tick, and how I want to show up in the world. Yes. It sort of became the only option. And awakening to this setup of society, coupled with my philosophy and my curiosity, sort of drove me inward. And it was that experience of going inward that made me really sort of come to terms for the first time with what is the nature of reality and what is it like, and helped me to see that despite whatever troubles are going on in the world, there is this invisible, benevolent force that is always trying to work things out for our good. This is where the Bible is so funny, because it has so much truth in it. If you don't misunderstand it and think of it all as rules, like there's that verse that says, God works all things out for good for those that love him and live according to his purpose. And that's so true if we understand that God is this energy and this divine benevolent force, and it's not like one specific guy with one specific right way sitting up in a cloud judging everybody. Growing up, my dad was a pastor, and he followed the 10 Commandments and so on and so forth. But as he grew up, he's nearly 90 years old now, so he's seen a lot of change throughout the world. And as he's grown and seen the change, he's realized his perception and understanding of the God he used to worship, so to speak, has changed now. And he's realizing that the concepts and the dogma that was behind the Christianity was just a religion that was there. I'm not saying it's there just to separate people, but if you misinterpret the scriptures within the Bible, then it could look that way. I want to take it back to growing up in the 90s for you, because as you said, you were a gay man growing up in the 90s. How was that for you? You know, it's interesting because it's like, that's the water I swam in. So it's like, I want to say it was normal. It felt normal for me, you know, but like on reflection and through the work I've done to become more self-aware, I realized that I sort of built up these habit patterns of hiding a lot of my true nature, because I was like living in the closet until I was 23 years old. And so that sort of amounted to me living in the closet in other ways too, not just the sexuality closet, but I lived in the spiritual closet. And like even some of the deep questions I had about life that sort of scare other people to want to talk about, I kept those in the closet too, and sort of deferred to being a people pleaser rather than being a full authentic self, right? Like that. So it had those ramifications for me, and which honestly is a big part of why the secular awakening, that side of the awakening, like seeing the setup of society, was also so scary, because I was like, I'm just coming into myself now, and suddenly the whole world falls apart too, which is why a lot of people talk about their spiritual awakening coming along with, or even being seen by the larger population as, a mental breakdown. And I relate to that very much, because like I didn't have like an official mental breakdown, but I certainly had like a time in 2012, 2013 where everything I thought I knew went out the window. Like I started watching documentary after documentary about 9/11, and I was the person ruining dinner parties talking about Building 7 and all kinds of like I couldn't. Yeah, right. And but at the same time, I was immersing myself in books about philosophy and reading sacred texts that I could get my hands on. Anything that, so I was like learning about falsehood and trying to learn about quote unquote truth at the same time, which was very weird. And in the end, all of the concepts, they weren't helping me. They were helping me frame this new idea, like priming my brain, I would say almost, but it's like having the cognitive understanding that I can't die and that I'm a spirit in a human experience. It was like that stopped being helpful at the level of like, okay, but I'm still surrounded by GMOs, so what do I do about it?
You know, you believe in angels and spirit guides?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that, because I was going to go there anyway, because the thing is, it's about, for me, it's the freedom with this whole awakening journey and with all of these ideas, angels, demons, alien channeling, crystals. It's all about remembering that the dogma doesn't matter, and that if it's made of language, it's probably a lie. So like, if you have an experience of an intuitive nudge and you assign that to an angelic being or a spirit guide, there's no stopping you from doing that, and that's totally fine. If you assign that nudge to the one true God, the Father, heavenly host, and you're a Christian, that's also fine. If you assign that nudge to Allah, fine. You know what I mean? So, because in the end, it's about the experience of living life being guided rather than living life flailing about. And if you're living life being guided, and when I say being guided, I mean trusting the thread of your own curiosity and trusting the thread of your own intuition. And so where you assign the intuition as coming from, in my mind, is totally secondary. It's like, it's tertiary. It's like, it's almost irrelevant, because that's just our human brain trying to make sense of the phenomena of the fact that there is this benevolent force that's willing and ready to guide every single person, which is what makes the deep rabbit hole of darkness less scary when you grasp that, because you realize, like, no matter what they are trying to do out there, or no matter what the psychopaths running the world are trying to do, or whether the world is run by alien entities from outer space, it doesn't really matter, because we all have this sovereignty to guide our lives through our intuitive nudges, through the intimacy of the nudge, right? And that intimacy of the nudge can be assigned to whatever you want to assign it to, but it's true, it's present, it's there, and it works for every single person if we know how to access it. And that is
just about to say that it's accessing it, because I know you say it's there for everyone, and I know a lot of people might be watching this saying, well, I ain't fucking felt it. So the gazelle doesn't need the lion to come up to it and tell them they're not friends, right? The gazelle can sense the lion. They sense the lion when it's, I don't know, half a mile away. It feels through life. And that's where humans have sort of blocked themselves off from their emotional body to be able to communicate through feelings, because that is a language that humans are and do have, but I think we block ourselves off from that, or don't know when that intuitive nudge, they don't know how to sense it, or they don't know how to dissect what they're feeling, so they just fob it off for something else, where it could be that intuitive nudge, but because they've never experienced anything like that before, they don't know what it is.
Yeah, that you're totally right. And because the culture, at least this Western culture, it actually tells us by design wholeheartedly to ignore those nudges and go towards productivity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Go towards the tried and true methods. And so we're actually taught from birth, and whether this is a vast conspiracy for centuries, or whether it's just the nature of how the humans evolve with our learning language, like that doesn't actually matter either. The point is, this is where we're at. We're at this place where humans are cut off from the guidance that we see evident in every other species on the planet. So like, when you can look at that and say like, okay, then we must have that too. And what's blocking it? And what's blocking it for me is language and culture, right? And so when we can leave language and culture behind and get back to the wild, like the internal wild, we can then return to like the nature is wild, right? Like unless you're talking about a dog or a cat that we've domesticated, nature is totally wild. And so one of the methods that's been working for me as I learn more about my intuition and how valuable it is to trust it, like the more you follow intuitive nudges and they lead you to something fucking amazing, the more it becomes easier to follow intuitive nudges in the future, because it's a self-reinforcing cycle, which is why a gazelle will never violate their intuition and go try to make friends with a lion, because their intuition has never let them down. And so one way that I've started to understand that our intuition speaks to us is through curiosity. So it's like, if you can't feel an intuitive nudge and you don't, and whatever's happening inside you, it doesn't feel so spiritual or etheric that you're like, oh, that's an intuitive nudge because it came from outside of me and it's in me now. It's like that, they're not always like that. It's sometimes it's just very clinical seeming. And it's like, what are you most curious about right now? What feels the most exciting to you right now? What fascinates the shit out of you right now? That is the next hot track for you in your life. That is the next thing to do. But the cultures that we are born in teach us the opposite of that. And so we're actually trained to ignore the nudges and to get the right answer in school. We're literally trained the opposite way. You know what I mean? And so people think, oh, I don't have access to my intuition, or I don't have access to this divine guidance. And what they don't understand is that divine guidance is speaking to you all the time in the language of what do you want to do next?